All right, so we're going to dive in here to chapter number 7. Chapter 7 is going to cover things called lists and tuples. Thus far, in all the studies and all the demonstrations that we've been doing, we've just sort of been working on variables. Essentially, we get some user input or we read from a file, we assign that data to a variable. Maybe we repeat through a loop structure of some sort, but we really haven't had any conceptualization of sort of bringing data in to our program in some sort of a structured manner. Okay, now I've mentioned lists before. You've seen lists. The range function actually returns a list, an iteratable list. So you've kind of seen them a little bit. You've been working with them a little bit without really necessarily knowing it. But now we're actually going to dive in here and really get to know what these lists and these sequences and these tuples and all of these sort of data structures are in Python. Okay. So obviously in this chapter, we're going to be covering sort of the basics of lists and then moving all the way through to tuples. Okay, so obviously to start out with, we're going to talk about sequences. So sequences are a general term to sort of describe these lists and these tuples and, you know, even dictionaries and stuff like that. Okay, so we're going to talk about sequences, lists. We're going to talk about slicing lists and messing around with lists, like lots of list manipulation. And then we're going to finish it all out with tuples. Okay, so and what tuples are and how they are delineated from lists. All right, so to start out, obviously we need to understand what a sequence is. So a sequence in Python is any object that contains multiple items of data. Okay, multiple items of data. So it could be a list of names, first names. It could be a list of last names. It can be a list of ages. It can also be a list of sort of compound data. Okay, so I may in this list have first name, last name, age. 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 So we can actually have multiple different data types included in these lists, which is one of the most powerful elements of Python. Like in a strictly typed language like Java or C, you're always going to have lists of the same type. What's cool about Python is you can actually have lists that have different data types within them. So you can have a string, and then you can have a Boolean, and then you can have an integer, and then you can have a float. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be repeated. Now, repeatability is important because we have to loop through these lists in some way, shape, or form. We need to be able to process them. So having a random list would be a little bit more difficult. Now, you can still iterate it one at a time, but if I have a first name, last name, age, it means I can jump by 3. Okay, which we know in the range function, we can actually throw in a step value, so we can step by 3. And so I can jump to the next set of information, grab the information, jump to the next set of information, grab the information. And I'll demonstrate to you exactly what that looks like as we move forward and messing around with these lists. But to start with, all you need to understand is a sequence is any object that contains multiple items of data. So again, this is an object that has data in it. So again, Python provides a bunch of different types of sequences. The ones that we're going to be focusing on in this particular chapter are lists and tuples. And the difference between these is that a list is mutable, so you can change it. Mutable means change. And a tuple is immutable, which means it is not changeable. Okay, so a list is mutable, which means, let's say in the second element of that list, I want to change that value in some way, shape, or form. I can do that with a list. In a tuple, in the second, if I want to change the second value of a tuple, I can't. It's immutable. Okay, so that means that a tuple is going to be maybe a little bit safer when you're just sort of reading data and you don't want it to be messed with. A list is not going to be safer, but it's going to be more functional because you can actually update the values in the particular list. Okay, so we understand that a sequence is an object that contains multiple items of data. Now we have a little bit more specific definition of what a list is, which is an object that contains multiple data items. Now again, a list is a sequence, so all lists are sequences, but not all sequences are lists. So you consider a sequence as sort of the grand, the highest level in this hierarchy. Okay, the domain of sequence includes lists and tuples and some other structures as well. But a list is an object that contains multiple data items. So these multiple data items in that list are called elements. Okay, so when I say an element in a list, that means it's just an item in the list. Okay, so again, you can look at the format here and you can see you just give it a variable name. Whoops, I don't want to mess with that. You give it a variable name, and then you have your different elements. You can have an element 1, element 2, element 3, element 4, element 5, so on and so forth. Okay, now that can go on for as long as you want. You can have 200 trillion elements. Obviously, you'd have to have quite a powerful computer if you wanted to be able to do that. And as I mentioned, the cool thing about these lists is they can actually hold items of different types. So I can have a float, I can have a Boolean, I can have a string, I can have an integer right back to back. So it's not required that I have these all of the same type. Okay, so now what's cool is the print function that we've been using a bunch can actually be used to display the entire list, which is really, really nice. And as we're getting introduced to these lists, you're going to use the print function often. And it's really useful that the print function has sort of a default way to display it, because then you don't have to build out the code to actually like iterate through it and print it out each time. You can just throw the print function, you can see what you have in there, and you can make it work. Now, we also have this list function, and what this list function does, and you're going to use it sometimes, you're not going to use it sometimes. The list function is a way, it's sort of like int and float. You can convert certain types of data or data and objects into lists, essentially. So if I have a tuple, I can use the list function. I can convert the tuple into a list. Now, keep in mind, if I convert the tuple into a list, the tuple itself is still immutable, but the list that you create is mutable. Okay, and we'll go over that to make sure that that's very specific to you, or that you really understand that. Okay, so here's a sort of a visual representation of what some of our lists may look like. So if you've done any coding in anything like C or Java, or if you've experienced any of the strictly typed languages, most of them, and they're called arrays in Java and C, but these lists usually just have numbers or float or string or something like that. Okay, so you may have something like even numbers, and that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, so on and so forth. And this particular list has 5 elements: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, you can have names. Okay, so the name is names. That's your variable name, and this element has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 names on it. So we have Molly, Stephen, Will, Alicia, and Adriana. Okay, so these are all strings, these are all integers. But what's cool about Python is we can actually have this thing like info. Okay, so now we have Alicia. I'm assuming this may be her age, and this may be, income per month or something like that. So I actually have this little bit of info in this list about a specific individual or about some specific entity, which, as we talked about in the last video, we can actually take a record, we can parse through that record, grab all the fields, add each field into a list, and then go to the next record, add all the fields into a list, and then we know that we can iterate from one record to another record in the list by how many fields there are. And again, I'll show you how that works. So let's say that in the record, which is a sort of a comma delineated structure, we have first name, last name, age. Okay, so in that record there are 3 fields. So I'm going to read in the first name to the list, I'm going to read in the last name to the list, I'm going to read in the age to the list. Okay, so that's one record comprised of 3 elements. So then I'm going to jump to the next record, and I'm going to read in the first name, last name, age. And then I'm going to jump to the next record, first name, last name, age. So that means if I just had these 3 records, I have 9 elements in my list. So I can start at the very top, jump 3 to find the next record, jump 3 to find the next record, jump 3 to find the end. Okay, because there were 3 fields in each record, I can jump by 3s. Okay, so again, I want you to sort of think about that, and I will show you what that sort of looks like. So obviously, when we have a list, let's say we have a list of 10 elements. Okay, so we have 10 items in this list. It'd be really nice to be able to move through this list, and I've kind of been hinting at it by being able to quote unquote jump from part of the list to part of the list to part of the list. So in general, we're going to start out with just going through a list one element at a time. Okay, so this is sort of what we call iterating over a list. Okay, so now the cool thing about this is you can iterate over a list using a for loop, and we've already kind of done that. So when we pull a file in, it's almost like a list. So for line in F, print line, that gives us each line. So that acts sort of like a list. It's the same situation. If I have a list of data, and let's say it's the individual records. So we have first name, last name, and age. I can do for element in, we can call it info. For element in info, print element. And then that's going to print, first name, last name, age, first name, last name, age, first name, last name, age, first name, last name, age. And I will show you this in PyCharm. Now, we also have this thing called a repetition operator. I don't spend a lot of time on the repetition operator because what it does essentially is it makes multiple copies of a list and then joins them all together, which there's not a lot of usages for that. So essentially, let's say we have a list filled with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we called that numbers. Okay, so I could do numbers times 5, and so I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 5 times. Okay, so that's the repetition operator. We're not going to probably use that in this class, but it's a nice little nugget of information for you to know. So as I have mentioned, we have these lists. Okay, so this one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elements in it. Okay, so we have something that we need to introduce now called indexing. Okay, so when we think about indexing, sometimes it can be a little difficult to understand what that means. But what indexing is, it's sort of like when you open a book and you look at the index. If you look at that index, you can say, okay, chapter 1 is at page 20, and chapter 2 is at page 30, and chapter 3 is at page 40. So you can go to the index, you can find the exact page that you need to go to, and then you can turn straight to that page. Okay? It's sort of the same thing with lists. Only the way that we index in lists, again, I said this has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elements, correct? We index each of these elements starting at 0. Okay, so in computer science, in coding, every single count starts at 0. And I want you to remember that. Every count starts at 0. Okay, so the index of this particular list at index 0, right here, we're going to have 2. At index 1, we're going to have 4. Index 2 is 6. Index 3, 8. Index 4 is 10. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. That is their index. And this is across the board. So index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Index 0, 1, 2. Okay? Every single list starts with index 0 and counts from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so on and so forth in every single instance. Okay? So that is what indexing is. It's simply a number specifying the position of an element in the list. Okay? So you can access individual elements in lists. So I can jump directly to element number 5. I can jump directly to index 5. I can jump directly to index 2. I can jump directly to index 75 if I have a list big enough. Okay, so you can access the individual element on the list right away. So the index of the first element obviously is always 0. Second element is 1, so on and so forth, and the last one is n minus 1. Okay, so what they mean by n minus 1 is this has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elements. 5 is n. Okay, that's the number of total elements. N is number of total elements, so that's 5. So 5 minus 1 is 4, which means the maximum index is 4, n minus 1. Okay, so this n equals 5, which means the highest index is 4. N equals 3, which means the highest index is 2. Okay, so n minus 1 will always be the top element. Okay, so remember that. We're going to be using a function called length, or len, that will return n. That returns n. So if you try to grab the len of a list and then try to go to that, it's actually going to throw an error because you need to make sure it's len minus 1. Okay. Now, what's cool about Python, we can actually do negative indexes as well. So we can start relative to the end of the list. So if I start at -1, it's going to be the last element. -2 is the second to last element, so on and so forth. All right, so we're going to go ahead and take a short break. I want you to think about some of this stuff, maybe get a cup of coffee, get a drink, and then come back and we're going to keep chatting about some of this stuff.